Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in freshman English. We are in our MyPerspectives consumable volume on page 759 and following. We're now going to look at Sherman Alexie's The Powwow at the End of the World. I'm with you starting on page 759, then we'll jump over to 762 for the actual poem. First of all, Alexie, born in 1966, we've lectured at learnstrong.net on a number of Alexie poems. He grew up on the Spokane Indian Reservation in Washington State, somewhat close to where we live here in Wyoming. As a child, Alexie suffered from seizures and spent much of his time in bed reading. After he finished college, his career as a writer took off. Since then, Alexie's won numerous awards for his novels, stories, screenplays, and poems. Genius poet, making some very often controversial observations, especially about Native Americans. The Powwow at the End of the World background information will begin with understanding this poem has a lot to do with the Grand Coulee Dam. It spans the Columbia River. It stands 550 feet tall and over 5,000 feet long. Completed in 1942, the dam was built to provide jobs and generate massive amounts of electricity for the region. However, the dam has been very controversial. Its creation flooded Native American communities, forced thousands to relocate, and the dam has blocked salmon migration and in fact was used to supply energy for the production of the first atomic bomb. So you're going to see all of that information referenced here in this prose poem on page 762. Now, why do we call it a prose poem? Well, it looks like prose, doesn't it? It doesn't look like a normal poem, and there is much to be said for the power of a prose poem. Let's go ahead now and read and annotate as we go. I am told by many of you, and we're going to hear this, by the way, all the way through this poem, this I am told by many of you. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after an Indian woman puts her shoulder to the Grand Coulee Dam and topples it. I'm told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the floodwaters burst each successive dam downriver from the Grand Coulee. I'm told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the floodwaters find their way to the mouth of the Columbia River as it enters the Pacific and causes all of it to rise. I'm told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the first drop of floodwaters swallowed by that salmon wading in the Pacific. I'm told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon swims upstream through the mouth of the Columbia, and then past the flooded cities, broken dams, and abandoned reactors of Hanford. I'm told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon swims through the mouth of the Spokane River as it meets the Columbia, and then upstream until it arrives in the shallows of a secret bay on the reservation where I wait alone. I'm told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon leaps into the night air above the water, throws a lightning bolt at the brush near my feet, and starts the fire which will lead all of the lost Indians home. I'm told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after we Indians have gathered around the fire with that salmon who has 3 stories it must tell before sunrise. One story will teach us how to pray. Another story will make us laugh for hours. The 3rd story will give us reason to dance. I'm told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall when I am dancing with my tribe during the powwow at the end of the world. Now, the brilliance of this poem is its cyclical nature. Notice the repetition. Put that in 2B right away. The repetition. I am told, and I must forgive, and so I shall. Of course, this I am told that I must forgive is a mantra that's often recited towards oppressed peoples who are told, you just have to get right with it. It's the way the world is. The tautology of all tautologies, it is what it is. Notice the futuristic, though, tendencies in this poem. I will forgive, but only when. And then we'll go through the poem. Notice, when an Indian woman puts her shoulder to the Coulee Dam and topples it. In other words, when this dam is no longer there. Or when, for example, each of the dams downriver are also destroyed. Or when the Columbia River enters the Pacific and causes it to rise. Or when the first drop of floodwater is swallowed by that salmon wading in the Pacific. Notice how everything is interrelated, everything is connected in some way. of course, when we start messing around with the environment in this way, we obviously, it's a trickle effect, right? That is to say, there's all kinds of implications for this kind of thing. And then finally, of course, I'm ready to forgive when the Columbia, when a salmon swims upstream through the mouth of the Columbia, past all the flooded cities, the broken dams, the abandoned reactors of Hanford. Your footnote there will tell you, of course, Hanford is the nuclear production site in southeastern Washington state where the plutonium for the atomic bomb that ended World War II was made. So notice, we're talking about issues of economics, about issues of environmentalism, about issues, of course, of military conflict and resolution of conflict vis-a-vis the dropping of weapons of mass destruction. And then finally, that salmon is going to find its way through the mouth of the Spokane River, upstream until it arrives at the secret bay on the reservation where, notice, I wait alone. And the word alone is a powerful word. Some have argued it's the most powerful word of the entire poem, right? They're alone. But notice, we're always saying many of you. I am told by many of you, I've got to forgive, and so I shall. After that, salmon leaps into the air above the water, and then we have some mythology that's beautifully created here. Throws a lightning bolt at the brush near my feet, and starts the fire, which will lead all of the lost Indians home. So all kinds of powerful symbolism going on here as well. I'm told, finally, I'll forgive after we Indians, he says, have gathered around the fire with that salmon. And the salmon, of course, will tell 3 stories, right? One story, notice, and it all told before sunrise. One story teaches us how to pray. Another story teaches us how to laugh. And a third story, how to dance. And of course, this is the beautiful thing of this cyclical nature of this poem. And there it is. What is it that powwows are about? Praying, of course, laughing and dancing, right? The cultural beauty of this poem as well. I'm told by many of you I've got to forgive, and so I shall when I'm dancing with my tribe. Notice, no more alone, right? During the powwow at the end of the world. In other words, what is the point of this poem? I will be happy, I will be willing and able to forgive when I see the destruction finally over. Now, question at 3A, why is this poem going to be in the 6th unit that regards issues of the end of the world and survival and, of course, apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic visions and dystopian types of understandings? What are your thoughts on that? Write that one down. And then finally at 3B, what do you do with a poem like this? How do you respond to people who say, you just have to forgive and get over cultural horrors of the past? How do you answer that question? And of course, how does a country like the greatest country in the history of the world, our country, move forward knowing full well the horrors that have been inflicted on any number of indigenous and important peoples who were here before? How do you deal with that? How do you answer that challenge? I hope this poem will lead you to more of Sherman Alexie. Beautiful, beautiful writing. Thank you.